We had Nick speak with us in kind of the middle end of last year on one of our online events. Nick is Director of Digital Transformation at Imperial War Museums, and Nick presented on digital transformation failure and how to get it right. It was a great presentation. So Nick, it's a pleasure to see you and have you back with us. Welcome.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Good stuff. And then we've got Jia-Yan, and I've worked with Jia-Yan quite a lot in the past. We've had Jia-Yan speak when Jia-Yan worked for HSBC, and you've joined us on quite a few panel sessions in an actual in-person capacity, would you believe it? And where handshakes were permitted and we could sit alongside one another on a stage. So a warm welcome to you, and this is the first time I've spoken to you since your new role. So welcome. How are you today?
Thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, I'm feeling great today to be part of this panel session, and of course I long to be there in person, and I'm sure we all do as well. But isn't it incredible that we can connect in this way online?
Definitely, and like I was saying, we're getting more used to it as well, and the often the clunkiness as well of these online events, and even just internal conference calls, where I think we're all getting a bit more used to how they operate. Perhaps Nick, I can start with you. If you could give a bit of a short introduction to yourself, and because this is a digital transformation event, perhaps if you could give your definition and take on what digital transformation means to you.
Sure. So I've been, I guess, in digital, that's quite a loose term, for a couple of decades, which I guess is as long as you probably can be. So my first job was essentially webmaster. So that's right at the beginning. And the last 10 years of that have been focused on digital transformation. And it's a really interesting question in terms of defining digital transformation, because often you have to define digital first, and a lot of people struggle to even do that, including myself quite often. I have over that vast period of time sort of eventually, having failed to describe it so many times, boiled down to this. Digital is where technology meets communication, in my view. Mm-hmm. And so what's digital transformation? I think digital transformation is about redefining your organization in a digital era, basically. So nice. It is about technology, but in reality, it's much more about understanding your customer or understanding people and how that translates into technology, and how you constantly adapt yourself and your organization within that context. So I don't know if that's any simpler, but that's where I've landed.
No, I like it. It's a good definition, and I think the sentiment on that is shared from quite a few point of views from speakers and panelists of past. So real nice definition of that. And then over to yourself, Jia-Yan. How do you kind of define digital transformation, and perhaps as well tell us a bit more about your new role and where you're at now?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. So my new role as Principal Engineer for Retail Digitech at NatWest is all about digital transformation. I'm focused on the shared experiences and digital transformation platform, which enables all of our retail customers to implement new digital journeys. And what that means is really using technology and using innovation to be able to adapt to the latest challenges and also to meet customer potential. So we have a really big purpose-driven initiative to maximize the potential for our customers and also for our colleagues as well. So for us, transformation has a really big dependency on having the best engineers, the best ideas, to also use Agile and DevOps cultural transformation as well, to be able to connect the right opportunities with the right people, to be able to really bring change to the organization, also change to the benefit of our customers as well. And also a big theme is to make sure that we're also connected with our purpose in terms of sustainability as well. So we want to embed that in everything that we do and all of our technical innovation, to be able to make sure that we optimize on performance when we're designing the next software program, And also when we're looking across our estate to make sure we transform. So we're working towards inefficiency, towards a great developer experience as well. So it's really very holistic in the way we approach it. But it's incredibly exciting. It's sort of ever changing, and so much full of potential as well.
Nice, thank you, and it's good to have you back with us. I think I must have cursed it before when I said that we'd have no issues with speakers joining for the Q&A, and I've really badly landed that on Matt actually. So I do apologise to Matt, as he is. I can see in the background he is still trying to get through. So hopefully at some point in the next few minutes we will have Matt with us, and I'll ask that question as well. But in the meantime, we will crack on and get on with the questions, and then hopefully Matt will join. It's entirely my fault, that one. I know I cursed it. So back to you, Jia-Yan, with this one. We've seen an increased need throughout the last 12 months to break away from legacy mindsets, with many organisations, if not every, facing some kind of huge pivot or change in the way they operate and serve customers. What's been your experience over the course of kind of the last 12 months with regards to transformation and innovation and the evolution of such?
Yeah, so for us, we have a big focus on transforming our ways of working. So internally, we've created a lot of different agile teams, and the whole Scrum of Scrums, and being able to integrate end to end and having ownership, giving our engineers ownership end to end of the whole customer journey, and working very closely with business. We have some great business partners who really see us as one team and as the same team. So that's really breaking away from that legacy mindset where you have requirements that come sort of waterfall top down from the business, and then there's a lack of feedback before the delivery, which is very expensive to deal with. Especially with testing as well. So we're focusing on sort of shifting left, making sure that we test throughout our development experience, and making sure that we're really connected to the customer as well. So we're focused on creating more empathy between the business, between technology, between us, and between the customers as well. And we really are so passionate about transforming that customer journey and customer experience, so that for our developers, it's very rewarding to create that efficient development process, and also that we're making a really positive impact for our customers, and so much more important during COVID as well, where it's been a stark sort of reminder to us how important digital transformation is. So if you sort of recall, during COVID, one of the because of COVID, what we wanted to do to support our customers is to bring in mortgage holidays. And we incredibly enabled 320,000 transactions to be completed in order to support our customers to have mortgage holidays, which really triggered innovation for us. So we did this calculation that it would have required 4 to 5 months and hiring a team of 150 people to enable that if we had worked in a legacy way. But instead, we took the strategic decision to implement RPA and automate that journey. And the first journey that we automated, we released into production in 5 days, and it had a huge impact. And then we ended up having now 180 different RPAs operating across retail. So without COVID, actually, I don't think we would have gone on that journey as quickly as we did. So it's really interesting, the kind of innovation that having that sort of challenge in the external environment really triggered. So yeah, it's being able to sort of have the latest development capabilities met with the ideas that we get from people on the ground and the passion that we have from across our software engineers to really push this to bring this to reality. It's been an incredible journey for us over the past year.
I can imagine, yeah. No, that's a really good answer. It's I think we've heard from the last few months, a lot of organisations are really forcing, forcing is probably the wrong word, because it's a good adoption, but an acceleration of technology and change and everything, that's a good thing. While we discuss that as well, I think Matt is with us. Matt, can you hear me?
I think so, yes. On
Yeah.
the fifth time of asking. Good afternoon.
That's all right. Good to have you with us, and thanks for joining, Matt. Do appreciate it. We were just getting stuck into the first question, so you've not really missed too much. And I was just about to move on to Nick, but I'll put you on hold there, Nick, for 1 second. And Matt, perhaps if you can just give us a real quick intro to the audience, and also just a very quick definition of kind of what digital transformation means to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Matt Mawdesley, I am Head of Innovation at Together Finance. Together Finance are a specialist lender based in Manchester in the UK. We typically do things where your high street banks would not. It could be due to the person, the product, or even the type of property that we're lending on. So typically a non-traditional lender. The business has grown really well, quite a traditional business, and I think that's what makes my role really interesting, actually. The fact we've got lots of manual, disparate processes and systems. It's very people-based, and therefore the cultural issues of transformation are really interesting and a good challenge. Prior to that, I worked at AO.com, the online retailer, in, again, a very similar strategic role, slightly more M&A acquisition, sort of broad strategic growth in terms of focus, but again, quite similar. And prior to that, I was a very boring banker and investor into technology businesses. So I guess, what does transformation mean for me? I guess it's really finding the sweet spot in between technology and people, and actually making sure that the technology works through the lens of what you do and what your business is. And it's got to be done, in my mind, to solve two problems: to gain operational efficiencies, but also at the same time to make sure that the customer journey, that UX is top notch, really. And I think trying to find the balance between efficiencies internally for bottom line gains effectively, whilst also marrying that up against creating that great consumer focus and that journey for customers. That's sort of the challenge for me, and I think that's why it's such an interesting role, right?
Yeah, nice. Well, thanks for that, Matt. Good introduction. I'm going to go back to Nick now with that first question. I'll read it again as well for the benefit of for you both as well there. So I said that there was an increased need throughout the last 12 months to break away from legacy mindsets, with many organisations facing big pivots and changes in their way of operations. And just asking kind of your own experience over the course of the pandemic with regards to that transformation and innovation and the evolution of such. And we'll start with you, Nick, on that. I know the last time we spoke, the museums were back to opening, and obviously we've been thrown backwards again. So how have you found it, and with respect to that kind of side of things?
Yeah, I suspect in that sense, it's almost the same answer again, because we've literally just been through it again. But so actually, for the museum and for a lot of museums, it's pretty fundamental, potentially existential. People saw us. It's not necessarily how we saw ourselves, but a lot of people saw us as buildings with stuff in. And now, if you look at our vision and our mission, it doesn't say that. It says actually we're here to inform the public about the causes, course, and consequences of war. And you can do that, and in fact, it's a really powerful way to do that, to tell those stories in the context and with some of those kind of machines of war and some of those objects that are connected with conflict. And we definitely do want to be in a position where we have our branches open and people can have that experience. Yeah. But the thing it really underlines for us, I think, is that actually there are so many other ways you can achieve that mission. And although the museum and many museums were sort of conscious of this, COVID arrived, maybe it didn't get the memo, and it arrived a little bit too early. And we weren't ready yet. So that's not to say in terms of like our operation and things, we're on Office 365, etc. Actually, in many aspects of our technology, we're relatively mature. So we were able to, in terms of our internal operation, continue operating quite successfully, which is good. I think we already had a really good focus on content, really good content people. a fantastic range of assets. We have millions of films and photographs. I'm pretty sure we own almost more than anyone. And in terms of our collection, there's probably only people like the BFI that have more significant sort of digital asset collection. There's probably a few others, but Pathé maybe. So, and all of that part of our operation was there. We have digitized millions of assets. They're ready to go. We've had teams of people who are content specialists. We have curators. So we're in a really good position to actually address our audience's needs and to start to deliver that message or those messages online, those stories online. So I think that's what we did really well. I think what we weren't quite ready for is, I guess, tying everything together, and also to the point that was made earlier about, or I think everyone's made this point about culture. So creating this. It's interesting when you talk to some leaders about culture or digital culture, that I think they often think they're having a conversation about our people don't know how to use technology. Can you come and teach them how to use technology? We want a digital culture, i.e. we want people who know how to use stuff. And that's not what we're talking about as Spectrum. We're talking about culture. We are talking about actually much more about understanding and creating a customer-focused culture, an agile culture, a culture of adaptability, and building not just our technology, but actually first and foremost through things like service design and user experience, maintaining this constant understanding of our customer and implementing technology that helps us adapt that customer, or an appreciation that actually there isn't just one customer journey that we want to take. There's millions of them, and we need to take a role in identifying what their preference is. Mm-hmm. As part of what we've done here, what's happened in COVID, actually, we now have this opportunity because we're now building all this data around actually what our customers did do when they couldn't go to a museum. So that's actually very useful. And we're a big Microsoft partner, and there's lots of Microsoft technology that we can and are leveraging to help us answer a lot of these questions and start to build these adaptable systems. The culture bit is probably the most important bit, and that's probably the bit where, if I'm completely honest, we're a little bit behind.
Yeah, no, good answer. Thanks, Nick. And with yourself there, Matt.
Sorry, I missed the start of the question. Was it the impact of COVID on transformation and plans?
So I basically start with a statement saying there was an increased need throughout the last 12 months to break away from legacy mindsets, with a lot of organisations having to pivot and change their operating models. And basically asking what your experience over the course of the pandemic was with regards to that.
Yeah, okay. So I think that's an interesting one. I think the financial services space is, in my view, one of, at the minute, the most transformative sectors globally. I think that is being impacted by a lot of the fintech sort of new starts coming in, and sort of the ripple effect of those businesses. So in the UK, Revolut, Monzo, etc., and the peripheral services of fintech. And I think that is probably termed with the fact that specialist lending in itself is a typically behind the curve industry. It's still pretty manual, as I stated earlier. And I think the business that I joined, so I only joined actually during the first lockdown, so I joined in June. So that was interesting. But the reason I was actually hired was to help accelerate those plans. And I think when you speak about transformation in the financial services sector, it's a lot around automation, bringing some of that digital capability to what are legacy and fairly manual processes. And that was always needed. And I think the whole industry knew that was coming at some point. I think actually what COVID did was accelerated those plans. I think what we saw was a huge shift in consumer sentiment and consumer behavior. You saw the online penetration immediately jump probably 5 or 10 years further forwards. And it was a similar conversation we actually spoke about when I was at AO a couple of years ago, Chris, around that online penetration. It had sort of plateaued, particularly in those older demographics and people who were typically less tech savvy. However, what COVID did was it forced people to have to operate in an online space. And actually now they have become more accustomed to that. That will continue sort of into perpetuity, really. And as you get younger demographics coming through, there's no way to hide from it anymore. So I think what it did was sharpen the conversation, particularly at board level in our business. And what it meant was we said, well, actually, we are reducing our lending as soon as COVID hit. We are a property-based secured lender. Obviously, we didn't know what was going to happen from the macro environment. So actually, that sped up the process of, let's drive transformation forwards now while we are operating at less capacity. Let's then go back to market after the coronavirus pandemic has passed. And actually, we should be in a far more structurally appropriate, business savvy way to be able to deal with customers and increase volumes going forward. So I think the short answer there is it accelerated the thinking, but the thinking was already there. And I think it just forced organisations to act. Because they knew that the world that will come out of the back of this pandemic will be completely different. You will have a generation of people that are far more accustomed to operating online because they have been forced to for a period of time. So I think it's great for all sectors, but particularly in financial services, in that the ability for customers of all demographics to be able to deal with you in whatever way they see appropriate or fit. That's what all providers should aim to be, and that's certainly what we are working towards.
Definitely, it's a good answer, and I think that's been echoed in a previous answer as well, and particularly throughout the day. In terms of long term, these innovations that we're putting in place and this different way of thinking for organisations is going to be beneficial long term. It's just kind of getting over that initial hump that the pandemic has caused, but with the budget announcement and everything yesterday, it looks like we can move forward in better shape anyway. So I think all these innovations and new ways of approaching work and the way we think, like I say, in the long term is going to be real beneficial to both businesses and, of course, the consumers, which is how we're having to evolve. So some good points there. And another thing that we hear a lot of on this event series, and particularly over the last kind of 3-4 months, is that around the digital workplace and how much that's evolved. And a couple of you have said about the acceleration of adoption of tools and technology within the organisation, which is very true. For you as individuals, how have you seen the digital workplace evolve? And remote working has thrown up many complex challenges that we're now starting to kind of overcome. What's been the most difficult of those challenges, and how have you overcome them? And have you overcome them? And perhaps we can go back to the start there and start with you, Jia-Yan.
So in terms of the tooling that we have, I think we already had a lot of home working available already. I think flexible working, especially when it comes to being more inclusive as well, that was really important to already have had that. So in that sense, it wasn't such a big transition. But I think going to more permanent home working, I think the biggest difficulty wasn't really a technology one. It was more that we were very concerned about each other as colleagues, about everyone's well-being and mental health. So we encourage colleagues to sort of take breaks away from the screen, so to remind all of our co-workers to prioritize health. And especially when sort of schools were closed as well, we made sure that flexible working, being very understanding of each other's work patterns, was utmost more important, because luckily we already had the tools in place within the organisation to connect with each other. I think in order to sort of continue that connectivity, there are a few nuances that we focused on, which was making sure that we could see each other, we could sort of use video more. There was potentially like a habit of being on mute, or having that picture up on Zoom, and then sort of small details like that we would pay attention to in order to try to simulate that kind of connectivity within the workplace. And then suddenly all of the internal tools really kind of had more of a life of its own. It came to the fore, using tools like Workplace to share all of our latest updates and use that as a theme to promote well-being as well. So I think that the biggest difficulty that we overcame is making sure that all of our colleagues stayed connected with each other. And there are a lot of opportunities that actually came with that. We were actually more location agnostic, because we all started to work from home. So then we could see a more sort of collaboration, more inclusion between our different global locations. So we have a large team in Edinburgh, a large team in London, a large team in India, and we actually used it to our advantage to create more collaboration, while making sure that we were sort of mindful of how everyone was sort of doing through the pandemic.
That's a really good answer. We had a chap from BT speak this morning, and one of the questions that came in with him was about that of mental well-being, mental health, and he was letting us know how BT use an app for their employees to, engage with those and make sure everyone's good and things like that. So it's good that organisations are thinking of that as well. It's been a good talking point earlier on today, so I'm glad that you could draw on that as well. And then with yourself, Nick.
Yeah, so Jen made a really good point earlier about empathy, and I think and I think you need that for your customers right now. Certainly in the banking and finance sector, I think we do as well. But I think empathy for your workforce and your staff is so important. I think the second lockdown has been harder, and it's so important right now for us to be kind to each other. People have had months of dealing with screaming children who you can't blame them. They're sort of climbing the walls, having never seen any of their friends for months. So, totally get that. And I think that so it's so important to actually encourage your teams to take time out and go, especially when it's been dark in the evenings as well. Like, just go out in the middle of the day for a walk. So I think there's a load of nothing to do with digital transformation, but actually there's a lot there in terms of just taking care of the well-being of your staff, particularly your technology staff, who actually have been put under enormous pressure last year.
True.
And so I've been really conscious of, I have every sympathy for people who have been furloughed, absolutely. But I think, there's been a lot of pressure on teams and stuff who haven't been furloughed, who've actually ended up with a huge amount of work to do.
Sure.
So the empathy thing, I think, really important. Now, I think one of the interesting things about what Jan said as well is that I guess NatWest, to some extent, have been thinking about this. Might not be true, but like flexible working and things for maybe quite some time. And I think as a museum, a really social workplace. I mean, a museum's a really social workplace, and almost I think no one ever felt the need to go out and get a platform like Workplace. Actually, a Workplace is a platform I've used before, and I absolutely I don't own Facebook shares, but I do love it. Right? I think it's great. And the main reason I think it's great is because it's both an internal communication kind of platform, enables those connections, but also it's really social. And so I think that is, so our adoption of things like Microsoft Teams was great. People adapted to it really quickly. A lot of people said, "Oh, we've digitally transformed." We haven't. It's much more than that. But what it did tell us is that our staff are really adaptable. They can adapt. And I think for leaders, for business leaders who are thinking, "Oh, we don't want big dramatic change because what if our teams can't, they don't get on with it, they don't like change," or claiming that their teams don't like change, when actually when big change came, a lot of them embraced it and actually it worked really well. So there's that. I think some really good positives there. I think for us, an organisation, and I think there'll be learnings from every organisation, but for us, I think it was actually what happens. We had a good idea about how we might communicate with our customers and our audiences where we're locked down, but actually we didn't think so much about our teams internally, and so that was a big learning for us.
Yeah, nice, good answer. Thanks, Nick. And then with yourself, Matt.
Yeah, so I think you guys have both touched massively on culture, and I think that was absolutely the most important and the most difficult thing to manage across the piece. I think if I think back to my time at NatWest, so I left in 2017. I'd been there for about 4 years at that point, and even then they had remote and digital working practices. I used to work from home 1 or 2 days a week, so it was very much an ingrained practice, I think, at NatWest. So they're absolutely far more mature than I think the business of Together is. That being said, I feel like we've adopted really well to it. I think we already had things like Microsoft Teams in place, so the tools were already there from a technology perspective. I think the real difficulty has been that we actually went through a period whereby we furloughed about a third of our staff. We unfortunately had to go through a consultation period where we got rid of about 20% of staff. And at the same time, we completely stopped doing business for about 9 months. That was all happening at the same time where people were at home, they were feeling the stresses of lockdown generally, and I guess that uncertainty. To your point, Nick, there were kids and dogs in the background of every meeting that you were on, and the whole pressure of the whole environment was difficult. And I think then bringing that back to change. So the point I made at the beginning of saying, because of that lockdown period and the reduction in trade, that accelerated our transformation plans. The actual consequence of that, which we didn't know, and actually in hindsight we should have done more about, was this idea of change fatigue. Actually, whilst all this was going on outside of the transformation work, we were still trying to push a dozen releases a month across different teams of new practices, new operational processes, new technology. We went live with a new app, a new lending system. We were trying to change the way we do valuations remotely. All of these things at the same time of it being that heightened, crazy environment where you're in the bubble, where I didn't leave this room, which is actually my kitchen and my dining room, for 12 hours a day. Sort of all of that got on top. And I actually think, with the benefit of hindsight, we would have probably been slightly more cautious and methodical in the releases we would have done from a digital transformation perspective, particularly in making sure that there were only a few per quarter on each team, rather than them coming lump sum almost in one big bang release. So I think there were some real learnings that we've taken from that going forwards, which has been helpful. But our business typically is a culture whereby it's always office based. It's very people orientated. We do a lot of business with brokers and long-standing customers, where it's a very traditional, old school face-to-face relationship. So we've started to do some phased return to the office. I was in this morning. The reason I've put a shirt on for the third time this year, which was nice. But actually, we've got an office where we can cater to 1,500 people, and there's maybe 100 people in per week. So actually, it's safe. There's that element of normality returning, but still, we've got a big portion of our business still working remote. So these challenges, I think, will remain going forwards.
Yeah, nice. 3 very good answers there. And then kind of moving on to the identification of kind of such tools and technologies. Like you were saying, Jia-Yan, at the start of your last answer, you already were in a position where you had the tools and you had the tech to, take NatWest and take the company through the pandemic without much issue. So I think adopting these digital tools was long on the agenda before the pandemic hit. These communication collaboration tools, it's nothing new. But how do you kind of, as an organization or as a leader in your position, how do you go about identifying the need for a new tool, particularly in the workplace or workforce? And how do you kind of go about that? How does something new come to the organization? And perhaps if we can start with you, if that's okay with Jia-Yan again.
Yeah, sure. So for collaboration, it's something that across any of our divisions we needed, and that's probably why it was more mature. Right now, in terms of what we're trying to do, is looking at all of the engineering tools and the continuous integration, continuous deployment. We're looking at developer experience now. So we're looking at making sure that we can attract the best engineers and give them the best tools to be able to help us to continue to innovate. So we've got a massive sort of concentrated focus on that. And we look at both internally in-house developed tools, because it's much easier for us to customize it, to optimize it for our strategies. But we do look at partnerships as well. So NatWest has always been founded on collaboration with innovation partners, as well as building up its own in-house software development expertise. So for us, we know internally what's our kind of sweet spot, what's our balance that we're aiming for. And we partner with lots of different organizations to trial and test the technology and look at pain points and gaps. So we frequently look at our agile and DevOps maturity across our different teams. We have engineering communities that I'm currently in the process of building and giving more resource to. So it's all making sure that engineers, and into the earlier question of breaking away from legacy mindsets as well, making sure that engineers are actually the leaders in our organization, that we identify ourselves as a technology organization rather than a technology portion of a bank. It's really important for us because technology underpins all of our transformation and essentially our survival and being able to be innovative and competitive with a lot of the marketplace today.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Thank you. And then over to you, Matt, with that same question.
Yes, I think a real interesting one, and you mentioned there around trials and tests, and I actually think to some extent, I think the fact that we are broadly remote and some of the drivers in the market are demanding this, but it's prompted the, I guess, desire to do more small scale trials. And actually at the minute we've got, I think, 5 live with one that's just been concluded. That, for context, is across an organisation of 400 people. So actually, they were all tech driven. All of them are third party solutions that we've started to trial and test. And I think the reason that we've got so many at the moment, and I ordinarily would think 2 at a time is probably sufficient. But the reason we've got so many is that the market drivers are demanding us to try new things. So I mentioned earlier around how do we do valuation? So we're a secured lender. So on every property that we lend on, whether that's a commercial or a residential property, we require a valuation. And at the minute, or for long periods of time, you couldn't go into a house to value a property. It made it more difficult, and therefore that typically elongates the process for a customer to get money to complete. Therefore, the very quick response was, how do we do more automated valuations? That's a tech-driven solution. So that really pushed a trial that we got up and running within about 4 weeks to try and do more. Similar for things like capital repayment holidays. So the government allowed us to pause payments for people that were on furlough. Actually, what the back end result of that is, as they come off of this furlough scheme and off the period and they roll back onto their ordinary sort of repayment schedules, there's certain regulatory things that require us to speak to every customer, analyse their financial statements, have a good conversation with them to make sure that the new setup is appropriate for them. Those typically were manual phone calls for an hour and a half with every customer. And they were done out of a call centre of maybe 40 people in our business. As at January of this year, we had 6,500 accounts that were having to have those calls. And therefore, you obviously get to a point where you're going, we don't have the manpower to be able to have all of these conversations and then process them. So that then required us to go to market in December and go, what tool can we find that can help us do that process? So we worked with an open banking provider to test. Within 4 weeks, we got a portal up and running that allowed customers to shave off about 80% of that time with us on the phone. They would leverage the open banking solution. They would send pictures of any information. It would digitally get scanned. We would not have human beings going through bank statements, which was the old process. That I think wouldn't have even been looked at as a solution or even a problem in the business, because it was something that just happened. It was the process. As with anything, it was sort of a bit of a chance conversation that said, we can't handle this volume that's going to come down the track. That prompted the innovation. So I actually think the time spent at home and all of these changing dynamics and requirements on the business to do things differently are creating lots of opportunities. For me, it's like a kid in a sweet store. I'm going around the business going, this is great. I know it's a problem, but that's great for me. Keep giving me your problems. We'll go and try and solve them. So I actually think the fact that all of these environmental factors have caused some pain, what that ultimately means is, coming out of this, we will be more agile, more nimble, and actually more accustomed to doing 4-week trials instead of saying, let's go through the legals, let's go through all of this due diligence. How do we quickly get something up and running just to test if it works in 4 weeks? And now we've proven it works. I feel like that new model going forwards will be far more beneficial in the medium term.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think there's a lot of that, even with the things like flexible working, remote working. Leaders have now seen that it can and does work, so it's going to allow workforces moving forward to act a bit differently. And with regards to technology adoption as well, it's going to allow you to kind of go about your job a bit better and with less bureaucracy and red tape and everything. So again, it's those processes in the long term that do get improved. And yourself there, Nick, on that question.
Yeah, so I think there are certainly for us, but I suspect others as well. There's opportunity and risk here, and as you might imagine, sort of it happens, and it pretty fundamentally affected our organisation. Lots of people around the organisation are now thinking, "Oh, we need to reach our customers. We need something," and technology is in such a great position now that they might or they can come to me and say, "Hey, Nick, I've got a problem." but they could just as easily go and sign up and start using a software as a service-based solution, which I'd rather they didn't do, not because I hate those, but because you end up being an organization full of people running their own small business on the side. And I think because also we're as you might imagine, we're a lot smaller than NatWest. So we don't build a lot of our technology. We buy it in. I think if you're a small to medium-sized enterprise, or slightly larger in our case, but still relatively small, you probably have to take an ecosystem approach, which is buying into, I don't know, Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics or something, and you're pretty much there. And what you're thinking is, I need to use these solutions or solutions that integrate well with these. So we have like API middleware and things, so we can use alternative solutions relatively easily. And Jia-Yan made a good point about like RPA earlier. I think, if you want to solve a problem quickly, those opportunities are there for you. Microsoft's now doing more RPA stuff as well, so that's opening up to us. And I think Microsoft have developed their Dynamics 365 products actually at quite a pace. It's really impressive actually how quickly they're building that out. And so that's opening opportunities up to us. But the key thing really, as I said much earlier, is I want our teams to focus on their customers and collaborate with us to understand what the ideal customer experience, what the current customer experience should look like. So we can build technology to meet that need. And often actually, because platforms like Dynamics 365 are really adaptable, there's a huge amount you can do without developers. You can do a lot of configuration and build what you need. You should be guided by specialists and developers. I wouldn't recommend that you just sort of barrel in and start configuring your Dynamics implementation on the fly. But there are there are way more opportunities open to us, and we can't. I loved when Jia-Yan was talking about developer experience and actually viewing themselves as a tech organization, and I love that. And I think you're starting to model yourself around some of the very impressive, like what were tech startups now. Huge organizations like Amazon and Google. I used to work for Google, and I used to have a team of developers. I was their boss. They all earned more money than I did, because in that organization, engineers are far more valuable than people with minor management skills. So I think that's great, and I think we're trying to move in that direction as well. But we probably can't pay the market rate that NatWest do in terms of our developers. So in some ways, building a really good experience for them or making them feel really valued is almost more important for us. So in terms of identifying and applying technology, I think we do have limitations, but actually some of these ecosystems are maturing really nicely, and I think that's been really useful to us, and it will continue to help us in the future.
Thanks, Nick. Good answer. And I'm conscious of time and don't want to keep you too much longer. So perhaps I'm going to go in with a final question here, and it's one of those final questions that we looked at, and that's going to be, what in your opinion is the most important part of successful digital transformation? And I know that is a huge question and also kind of a golden ticket question. We've focused a lot of kind of on the people culture side within this panel session, and I keep saying on the conference series we talk so much about the people and the culture within digital transformation, and of course that is probably the most important part. Is the organization at the end of the day. In your opinion, if it is people and culture, which I suspect it might be with you, what kind of element of that people and culture is the most important side of transformation? And I'm hoping that makes sense. And perhaps start with you on that one, Matt.
Yeah, so people are always the most important factor. I agree. I think going one layer further down, I think the involvement of the teams at all levels. So I think it's really easy for me to go and convince our executive to do this big shiny new thing that is great for customers, looks great, we can do a press release, and actually will save us more money. Fundamentally, you've ticked all the boxes there. That's going to fly through any committee that you require. However, they're not going to use that on a day-to-day basis. It's not going to be them that are stuck with the problem, so we're trying to embed this new piece of change, or we're building a new operational program around this, who have got to deal with the bugs and fixes. It's the people who are using this on the ground. So I think the most important aspect is almost a top-down, bottom-up approach. yes, get the execs, keep them happy. They're the guys with the checkbooks, but actually just go and speak to people who are going to use this on a daily basis. And I think I've probably fallen foul of this historically in prior roles where an MD's asked me to do something. I'll do what he says and just go, here you go. What we've not actually done is really got that on the ground qualitative feedback from the users. We say we do it, but actually do you sit with them and go, tell me the good things about this process, tell me the bad things. And actually, even just having those conversations, even if it's once or twice before a release, you very quickly find that they're far more engaged, they feel like they've been involved in the process. And actually, it's the simplest concept in the world that I think has a really big impact around that change fatigue, but also the adoption of change going forwards. So I think that's probably point one of that. I think point two is keep going back to them with the benefits that this is giving. I think, so we recently launched a new digital application journey in one part of our business. And actually, it was great for customers, but it was because of the new process, it was there was some embedding problems with the teams using this. And actually, after a while, they're going, oh, it's a new process that we've got to learn. I was used to the old one. Yes, it might be better over time, but at the minute, it's hard work because we are still learning. And actually, if you went to them and showed them some of the feedback from customers, showed them the time saving and actually over time, the amount of additional work that they would be able to get through, and ultimately to get more bonus, because that's how these guys were targeted, they're quickly going, okay, I understand that now, I'm on board with it. And very quickly, they started to give real practical feedback in terms of, oh, I think you could actually make the process better by doing this. Whereas prior to them sort of being bought into the benefits and the knock-on impacts across the business, they was just sort of going, it's something that's being thrust upon me rather than me being at the helm trying to make this thing better. And actually those two slightly nuanced views of just involve the teams a little bit earlier and give them a little bit more structured feedback. And also, guys, look how good this new thing is that you're involved in. That slight change of, I guess, tone and methodology really drives the adoption, I feel. So I think, yes, culture, but actually there's some quite practical things you can do there just to make this stuff easier for them.
Yeah, no, that's really good, an honest answer there. Thanks, Matt. And with yourself, Nick, on that golden ticket question.
Yeah, so absolutely culture, and so if culture, what then? So for me, it's all about mindset. Okay, so like many organizations, I don't think there has been change in kind of recent years, but there is, like, we got away from blame culture and we changed it. We started changing it to a culture of accountability, which is blame culture. It's just instead of being blamed, you were held accountable. Okay, so and so there's still a lot of fear of failure. If someone undertakes a project or a campaign, there's always a PowerPoint presentation at the end of the project or campaign, and no matter what the result, it was a glorious success, right? So whatever happens, even if you sold half as much product as you did in the month before, you reached more under 35-year-old women in Norfolk. So that's the big slide at the end of your presentation. So I'm not describing IWM per se, but I think actually all organizations to a certain extent. And I think IWM might be better than some of the others I've worked at, but some of that still exists in every culture. So moving from that culture to things like growth mindset, right? So instead of a talent mindset, growth mindset, I'm probably going to come across a massive Satya Nadella fanboy because I just picked up Microsoft a few minutes ago. But the big, before he became the CEO of Microsoft, that whole organization was kind of obsessed with Apple and building a cool phone, which they were failing at, like failing hard, right? And he refocused, like in terms of the business, on things like cloud and this dynamic stuff that I've just been talking about. Fantastic. But the most important thing that he did was actually changing their mindset and the mindset around developers. So instead of going out there and trying to get the best developers, they started to work with the developers they had and work with their mindset and getting them to adopt a growth mindset, which is not having a fear of failure, trying new things, just basically a learning culture. And this has been we all know here in sort of in digital and the sort of engineering world, this has been a thing for ages, right? But actually in the rest of our organizations, it often hasn't. And what we need is for the rest of the organization. So it's the things that underpin agile and like DevOps operations that you're constantly releasing, because you're constantly assuming that the last iteration you did was probably not good enough, because it never is, right? So you always need to be iterating. Some people don't like that, right? Because if you've worked for 30 years in a culture where you're terrified of saying to anyone you failed, that's a pretty significant change to make, and it's a hard change to make. And we're at IWM, we're a 100-year-old organization. I'm not saying our staff are that old, although we've been working there that long. But it is in many ways a traditional business, so that's a big, significant change to make to our culture. And many people actually are really interested in that. There's a lot of people at IWM who really support this way of working, and in recent times, as you might imagine, that has accelerated. There's been more interest in it. There's more people talking about the conference circuit, about culture and things. So that's good. It's all going in the right direction, but we're not there yet. And I think that is the most significant change that we can make, that adoption of growth mindset, like autonomy. That's where we want to get to. But for older organizations, it's going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, no, nice answer. Thanks, Nick. And finally, with yourself, Jia-Yan.
I absolutely agree with both Nick and Matt. People are so important, and that growth mindset, cultural piece definitely resonates with us as well. So for me, what I'm encouraging all of our NatWest engineers to adopt, and also it's really the definition about an engineer. So what we're driving at NatWest is an inclusive engineering culture. Because what that means is that everyone in our organization are expected to surface ideas. Now, ideation and getting new ideas for continuous improvement to see that small I innovation can be quite a hard thing for a large organization to achieve on a continual basis. So it's really important for us to support and empower all of our people to identify with that. And that inclusion piece is really important, because I've come across so many conversations where I've spoken to someone about solving a problem, and they have a really good idea, but they always introduce themselves as a non-technologist. Oh, sorry, I'm not a technologist, but I know what this problem is really important, and I've got the solution. And then I'm always like, hold on, you've been working in technology. This is a technology problem and technology solution, and you care about the customer. I count that as an engineer, and you have an engineering mindset. So that inclusion is really important, and that breaking down that cultural barrier of them versus us, business versus tech, developer versus non-developer, tester versus developer. All of these silos need to get broken down, and that's sort of the biggest thing for me, to make sure that we've got an inclusive team that can seed all of the changes we need to sustain our continual digital transformation.
Good answer, really good answer. And with that, we have hit the time. I don't know where the time went. It seemed to go pretty quickly, but a massive thank you to all three of you, to Nick from Imperial War Museums, Matt from Together, and Jia-Yan from NatWest. Thanks so much for joining me for the hour and for answering those questions. It's been a pleasure to have you with us, and you're all familiar faces as well, so it's been nice to have you back with us, and like I've said throughout the day and whatnot, I'll hope to see you actually in person at an event very soon, where we can perhaps not have to socially distance and share these insights in that environment. So a big thank you to all three of you for joining.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.